I'm Luke Melky, helping you master the art of filmmaking. Today we're talking about... Alright, today we're going to be talking about the Lumetri Scopes and color grading within Premiere. There's a lot of different techniques and things like that you can use. There's a lot of programs outside of Premiere that a lot of times are used, but I really like to keep everything within Premiere if possible. I know it may not have all the options that some of the other software has, but it makes it a lot faster workflow. For me, workflow is a big issue. So here we're going to show you a few techniques and tell you kind of how to read some of these random object shape thingies here, and we'll show you how to use them to create a pleasing looking image. So we're going to first start off here with what is a Lumetri Scopes. Well, here's what they are in Premiere. Here's kind of your general brightness, overall brightness. Here's another way to look at it here, and this is kind of where how are the colors falling within your image. The further out they go in the circle, the more saturated they are, the higher density of that color. This is yellow, green, cyans, blues, magentas, and reds. Okay, so the further this kind of object blob in the center goes out towards that color, the more saturation there is of that color channel in your image. And this line right here, this one is your skin tone. Every nationality has basically the same color of skin, so it goes right along here. I know people are like, well, person's black, person's white, person's whatever. It doesn't really make that difference as far as the color, but just how dark is the skin. So it's the same color tone, it just, if it's lighter or darkish. So this pretty well matches along with every skin tone out there. So if you want to really set a white balance and all you have is someone's face, like how do I know if it's the right color? You can pretty well balance it right along here by putting their skin tones along that line there. Look at this object over here. This is probably the easier one to understand how it looks. So this is broken up into the three channels, the red, green, and blue. That's how cameras see light, or that's really how light colors work. Red, green, and blue are the primary colors in the light system. So we have here red channel, green channel, and blue channel, RGB. And this is absolute white. If anything's at 100 or above, that what they call peaking the color, it becomes absolute white. If it comes below 0, it's crushing the blacks and becomes absolute black. So you can have some cameras that will record some information below 0, and they'll record some information sometimes up to about 110, but it looks like absolute white, so you can pull some of it back, but until you pull it back, it's absolute white. So here I shot this image with a high dynamic range. First, I'm going to explain what is high dynamic range. That means it has a larger visibility of what can it see in the shadows or the darks, and what can it see in the highlights or the brights. And a high dynamic range means it can see more of that. A low dynamic range means it starts clipping the blacks or the whites a lot sooner. So it can see more of the image in a high dynamic range without losing the detail in the whites or the blacks. And you can see in this shot here, I have a high dynamic range camera, and I really didn't need that because I'm not anywhere near filling that up. I'm only using about 50% of the dynamic range of this camera. And I don't really want to shoot in a high dynamic range if there's going to be this much space in there. I was just testing the camera here to see what it looked like, and now I can show you here how this works. The reason I don't want to shoot in high dynamic range if I don't need to is now I have all this space, I have to kind of fill it because it looks kind of bland as the shot is right now. High dynamic range looks really grayish, flat. As they say, it just looks really bland. It doesn't look that pleasing. So if I have this much space on it, I have to stretch the color information, which will start causing some pixelation, some digital noise, and some issues like that. So you don't typically want to shoot in high dynamic range unless you need to. But we're going to show you kind of how to fix some of this and how to make this image look a little more pleasing with Lumetri options here. So I'm going to effects. I'm shooting here with the Canon C200. So I'm going to the Lumetri Presets, Speed Looks cameras. They don't have a 200 yet for the C200. I'm going to just use a C300. From what I've understand, the image is pretty close to what it looks like. And it gives me on the side here some of the looks that I can quickly create. So if I just grab one of them here or from here and click and drag it onto this, boom, it looks a lot more pleasing to look at this way. It gives us stylized. And you can see here, it stretches the color range here. And we wanted try getting pretty close to using the full range of intensities of the brightness of the colors. So the more full we can get it, the more contrast within the image, the more life the image is going to have. So now I put that on there. You can see it stretched it out, so that's a good thing. We're now pretty close to 100 and pretty close to 0. I typically want to go between 5 and 10 for the darks, and between 90 and 100 for the highlights or the brights. And the focus point of your image should be somewhere between 65 and 75 is what I typically like doing. So if there's a face in there, that should be sitting right around the 65 to 75 on the brightness values here. And how I can see what is what's here as far as in the main image, what is bright, what isn't. This follows along. This is the left side of the image. This is the right side of the image, so it matches here. If in this point right here, approximately an eighth of the way through, that's an eighth of the way through here, that's what those colors are represented right in this here. So that's how the color channels work there. So I'm going to just undo what it did there, and we're going to look at a few different looks here. We also have the blue ice. Okay, this makes it look a little bit cooler, a little bit colder, but it also doesn't get quite as bright here. So I'm going to put this day for night onto here, and let's see what it looks like now. Boom. Now it looks much more like night. So if I move forward here where I'm actually walking up, it looks like it's kind of like nighttime now, which is kind of a good thing if I'm trying to make it look like it's nighttime in day. This is how a lot of times we'll shoot night shots in the daylight. They add things like this and makes it look like night, but they have a lot more lighting when they shoot in the daytime where the camera can actually see stuff. So I'm going to do that here. You've also noticed I have what I call adjustment layers here. Well, I don't call them. That's what they are. I like to use adjustment layers instead of putting the effects right onto the video. The reason for that is if I'm adding several different effects on here, I can easily go back and forth between what does it look like with effects and without the effects. I can also drag this over to do multiple clips that are the same setup. I don't have to copy and paste. If I want to make adjustment, I have to make adjustment to all of them. I can make it to one layer, and it does it for all of them. So I have a couple other layers up here that I've already done some of these. So I've turned them off here. So you can kind of see what it looks like in this one here. This is what it looks like originally. I'm going to move a little bit further forward where you can see the flag actually flying a little bit. And that's what it looks like once I do some color adjustments. I know it's a little bit extreme here, but I'm doing some extreme stuff just so you can see the difference. So that's what it looks like originally. That's what it looks like after color adjustments. It adds a little bit more life. Oh, I should say a lot more life than this. And once again, you see the dynamic range is a little bit more than I actually need. I'd rather have a little bit more than not quite enough, though. So that's kind of why I do the adjustment layers. I can turn them all on or all off very quickly. It also helps if you're using some effects that use a lot of GPU or CPU that your computer just can't handle it and it plays slowly. You can turn off the effects and then come back and turn them on when you need them later. And you don't have to worry about slowing down the computer and turning them off on every single video track, which is just really annoying. So I'm going to show you how I also created this look here on this shot here. So I'm going to go to this blank adjustment layer here. And then I have Lumetri in my presets here, my favorites. So I'm going to just click and drag that over there. If you can't find it there, go ahead and type it into here, and you should find it pretty quickly. So I'm going to go to here. I'm going to go to the basics. I'm going to pull these to help fill in some of the dynamic range. This is how you create the Lumetri from scratch. So I'm actually going to up the exposure just a little bit here. That's a little bit better. Now I'm going to take the shadows, and I'm going to bring the shadows down. Once again, I don't want to get really below 5. Typically, I'm normally between about 5 and 10. That gives a pretty good look there. I'm also going to take the highlights and bring those up until those get closer to 90. I'm going to take a little bit of the whites here, which is a little bit higher up in the lights, and bring that up so I get up to about the 90, 95. So now it has a pretty good range there, but I noticed it kind of brought up some of the shadows. So I'm actually going to take the blacks and tell the blacks to come down a little bit, and that'll bring the very, very bottom section down a little bit. You want to be careful also now to crush your blacks, because that really has problems when you put them up on YouTube, Vimeo, something like that. The blacks, when they get compressed and crushed, they just become very difficult to see, and they kind of become really pixelated, and it looks absolutely horrible. You'll see these like giant blocks of black kind of flickering in and out, and just really annoying. And if you get above absolute white, it doesn't do as much on Vimeo or YouTube, something like that. But if you're doing something like that on a over-the-air, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but I've been told it is, but I don't know for sure. I've not actually done this myself. But if you get above the 100 range, you actually have about the 110. It'll actually start messing with the audio frequency for like over the air TV. So the information about 110 and above in the white range start actually reaching into the audio frequencies when it's compressed. It's kind of weird how all that works, but it's compressing everything. So your light will actually affect your audio. You'll start getting this weird sound in your audio. So try to not have above 110. Just bring that down a little bit. If you have something that's hitting well above 100, even if it's still going to look absolute white, try to bring that down. So here I have the basic setup here. This looks a lot better than what it did before, but let's actually go and add a little bit of saturation because it looks kind of flat right now. Let's make it 135%. There, the reds are a little bit deeper. Well, maybe let's try 150. Yeah, the reds are a little bit deeper. That's a little bit more how you picture it. The blue looks a little bit more like the American blue. But the white balance is close, but not quite right. Let's go ahead and click this white balance selector. Click on there. There. It didn't adjust a lot because you can adjust the temperature here to adjust and compensate some of the issues that you might have had with the white balance. So it was pretty close, but not quite. That makes the reds and blues a little bit more true. So now that we did the saturation there, now let's go ahead and go to what I like using, the three-way color corrector. I know some people don't like this. Premiere has tried to kind of kill it out a little bit, but I really like this. So I'll show you why. Because I can actually go into what they call secondary color corrector and tell it to select this color range. I turned on the mask. I know it looks kind of weird right now. But what I'm doing is I am telling it to select anything in this basic color range. So I'm telling it just select this blue sky range. And that whatever's white is what is selected. Whatever's black is not selected. So it's not quite getting all the sky down here. So I can go ahead and adjust the concentration of these a little bit, play with a little bit of saturation, luminosity, and the hue. There we go. Now we got pretty much a perfect slate there. So I go down to soften. I'm going to soften the edge just a little bit. Basically, it feathers the edge of the image so it's not just a solid line, because if it's not exactly perfect, it's pretty obvious if it's not softened because you have this solid line of, oh, it's not changing color. I'm going to turn off the mask because I don't want it to look white all the time. Now I can go into my saturation here. I can up this up, say 200%. And now we have a much richer color out there, but it's really not quite the color that we normally think of as the blue sky. It's a little bit more tealish, and we don't really want that. So I'm going to here click the master, and I can adjust the colors of there to lean more towards the blues or the greens or whatever color is there. So I'm going to tell it to lean a little more towards the blues, and this here pulls how strongly it's going to lean towards the blues. This is a little more towards the blues. It's very, very strong towards the blues, I should say. But it's still not quite how we normally think of the rich, deep blue sky because it's too bright. So I'm actually going to go into the input levels and tell it to darken it down just a little bit. Now my sky is that darker, rich blue. I can go really deep. Now it looks really awful, really fake, but to show you the extreme of what can happen, I'm just bringing that down a little bit, and now my sky is much more blue. But I probably won't normally go quite that far. That's just to show the extreme there. I'm going to do a real quick side note here with my screen. Some people use high dynamic range when they do color grading. They have high dynamic range monitors. I don't actually have those for a couple reasons. One, they are expensive. Two, it's 99.something% of people probably don't have those high dynamic range monitors. So if I create something that's exactly perfect for a high dynamic range monitor, the chance that someone else has a high dynamic range monitor and can see everything that I'm doing when I'm putting it up on YouTube, it's very unlikely it's going to happen. And I'm putting it on YouTube and it compresses, and the compression is awful anyway. It's really not going to look that much different. And it's just a lot less work and a lot of money saved not having the dynamic range monitors. So I try creating my stuff more for what is my audience actually doing. I know some people say, well, if you start off perfect, it's a lot easier for everyone else. It's going to balance or close to everyone else. If I have a blue leaning monitor and I try to overcompensate and someone has a yellow and they overcompensates both ways and it becomes an awful image. My monitors are pretty close. I think if you calibrate them, you're going to have a close enough image that you can work with it and have an image that looks pretty close to what most people are going to see on their phone or on their computer, on their tablet. But if I was creating something for like a movie theater, I would probably want high dynamic range monitors because they have the color calibrated projectors and all that fun stuff. But most YouTube stuff, I don't think it's really that big a deal to not have the high dynamic range monitors, the special color grading monitors, just because the audience you're doing it for and the compression you're going to do on YouTube, it's not going to make that big of a difference. So as long as you can learn how to use these, you can pretty much nail in whether it's going to fit within the monitor's range or not. If you stay within the 5 to 90 range, you're going to pretty much work in most monitors. Some of the high dynamic range ones can go beyond those, but very, very few monitors are going to be doing that. So I'm going to go on to the next clip here. This is me playing with my son's toy when I was playing with my camera just after I got it. So I didn't have all the settings right. So you can see here, this is really kind of dark, and I don't need nearly this much dynamic range like I had in the camera. So I ended up creating it to look something more like this. So I went here, put on the Lumetri here, did the basic, upped the exposure by 2 stops. It still looks really bland, but you can see I brought the colors closer to the 100, but I also brought it away from the 5. So we're going to have to spread that out, increase the contrast there. So I'm going to actually pull some of the shadows down. That gives a little more richness to it. You can see here that the shadows are dropping down. I got about to 10. But as I increase the highlights, it's going to raise those up a little bit. So bring this up. It's a little more than I want to go. It's 150 is max. And if you start going extreme, you can see it's starting to get a little pixelated there. That's because I'm over pulling the image. I had to increase the contrast and the exposure. And now the image is getting a little bit pixelated, which isn't cool. I'm also going to click this white balance thing here and put it on this guy's little shirt here, because I know the white balance wasn't quite right. That's a little bit closer. I think it went a little bit extreme, so let's try that again. And you can just go ahead and redo this until you find something that's close enough to what you like. That's a little bit closer to what I was supposed to have. And now let's add it to 150 saturation. Now that yellow looks a little more real. It just looked kind of off before. So here's what it looks like pre. Here's what it looks like post. Much better this way. So let's move on to the next image here. This is the sky. This was my first test doing a sunset. There was no real spectacular sunset with this, so there's not a lot I can pull out. You can see the sun I did with high dynamic range is only sitting about the 70, and the darks are sitting at approximately 12. So I made it look a little bit more like this, increased the contrast, made it look a little bit richer. It still looks kind of fake. I understand that I was going to some extreme here. So I'll show you kind of how I did what I did. So I put the Lumetri onto here, go to the basics here, and I'm going to increase the brightness. I don't want to go too far with this. I'm not going to go. The reason I don't want to go too far with this is if I make it absolute blown out, it's going to be kind of extreme. And I'm going to take the blacks and pull the blacks down a little bit, but play a little more with the shadows. And I'm actually going to take the whites and bring those up a little bit to bring the brightness up. So now we have a pretty close to full range here. We can see a little bit of detail in the trees here, not a lot. And nothing in the sky is totally washed out. I mean, it looks like it's pretty much here, but technically it's not. So I'm going to go down now to saturation here. Let's bring this up to 200, because that's about as much as it goes. Now it's starting to look really fake in here, which I'm not a huge fan of that. But for the sake of this right now, we're going to go with it. We're going to have it kind of this extreme, like it's ending of a happy movie or something. And we're going to play with the temperature. I can make it a little more orange or make it a little more blue. If I want the sky to be more bluish or more orangish. We can do it that way. I can also increase it to make it look more like doomsday and make it more greenish. Add a little bit more of the reds into as well. I'm going to set it more like this for right now. And then I'm going to add, once again, the 3-way color corrector. And this is where I can, with the master channel, I can adjust the highlights, midtones, and shadows all at the same time. I actually turn that off. I'm going to make the shadows go towards the reds. And now I'm feeling more like it's almost like an ending of like discoloring, almost like more of an ending of a Western with the color settings here. And I'm also going to take the brights, and I'm going to bring them more towards the yellows. And let's play with the midtones a little bit. Let's not make that this way. That would look really weird. We're going to pull that more towards the reds as well. And this is the concentration of it. And now we got a little bit more color range, and then a little more what we expect with like a deep sunset. I know it's still not perfect yet. And you see here now we're starting to blow out some of the red channel here. We're hitting the hundreds. So let's go back up to the highlights and try pulling those down a little bit. And now we've got a little bit richer, deeper there. Let's also go with the whites, pull those down a little bit. But now it's looking really kind of flat. So we want a little bit of that intensity of the sun, because that's what we typically think of. So let's bring that down to more abouts here. Now we have the intensity of the sunset there. So we have one last one here, and this is going to be from a music video I did last year, the beginning of the year. So I'm going to turn on this, what we're going to try making it look like. Add a little bit more richness to the water. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Lumetri Scopes here, and we're going to not really play a whole lot with this, because the color range is pretty much where we want as far as dynamic range here. It was pretty close to what we needed there. I am going to play with the saturation though. Let's go ahead and bring that saturation up to, I think, 150. There, we add a little more color to the water, gives it more blues, and we have the green grass coming along there. So this is where I'm also going to add the three-way color corrector again. We're going to add the secondary color corrector again, because I want to bring up her face a little bit more. So I'm going to do the color picker there, show the mask, add a little bit more there. And we're going to play around once again with the luminosity, try to get a little bit more of her skin tone in there. Pull this up, and while I do this, I'm going to also make a shout out to Ben Everson, who we shot this music video for. This is his daughter. I just thank him for letting us be able to use this. Now go to the soften here. We're going to also add the soften, because it's, well, not 50. We're going to put it to 5. It gives a pretty good soft, because otherwise it looks really kind of odd once you start actually doing the effects. We see, yeah, we're getting a little bit of stuff out here. That's okay. And I'll show you how we're going to fix that so that doesn't get adjusted. Basically what I want to do is make it so her face is a little bit brighter. So we're going to turn off the mask here. There we go. So now the mask is off, or we can't see the mask. And we're going to go into here. We're going to bring the brightness up a little bit in here. We can also do the same thing with Rgb Curves. I typically actually use Rgb Curves, but just for right now, it's a little bit faster with this. I'm going to bring the midtones a little bit. We're not going to go too far, because then she looks like a ghost. We don't want to do that. Just bring up just a little bit so we can see her face a little bit better. We can see here, this is where her face is. Her face is sitting right around the 40-ish range. We brought up a little bit closer to 50. We don't want to go all the way up to the typical 60, 70 range, because then it looks really awkward here, because her face is supposed to be in shadow, then that doesn't look quite right there. So we're going to bring it up just a little bit, because that's what it looked like. Bring it up there, a little bit more emphasis in on her face. And like so, it was starting to do some odd stuff out here. We can go ahead and do a mask and do it there. So it only does it within this mask area. It has the feather here. Let's go make that a little bit bigger. We can also tell it to track. So if I click forward, it's actually going to track her face, and this track motion will continually only do the effects within where her face is. So I'm going to go ahead and click stop right now, because we don't need to see the whole thing. And now that track is following just her face, and it won't do any other adjustments out here. If you like this video, I say thank you, and if you could also like, comment, share, subscribe, and yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you.